Hi there, I'm John Mancini. Welcome to the OxyMorons, and I apologize if there was any confusion at all about the exact live time. I had 12 noon, and I might have inadvertently started it at 11:45. So anybody that's a little bit confused by that, so I apologize for that. Louis Eisen, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And I think you're in for a treat today. Lewis has a very, very interesting and refreshing perspective, I think, on the whole question of governance and particularly governance policies. One of the things that I've always found along the way is that, we tend to approach governance sometimes with a stick, and I think then we're shocked and appalled that the results don't match our expectations. So I always find your presentations really interesting and refreshing in that regard. And so I'm really, really glad to have you here a little bit today. So for those of you that are on, and particularly those that are on LinkedIn, there are little clap hands, and there's thumbs up and all that kind of stuff. So if you could push those buttons and let us know that you're there, that would be terrific. And then also, we're happy to have people join in with both comments and critiques and questions. And so if you do that, we'll make you a part of the show, and you can ask your questions live. So let me start with, just before we hop into to kind of the more serious questions, let me start with a couple of lighter ones, and then also get a little bit of background on who you are and what you do and what makes you a true oxymoron. So first of all, on your Spotify Pandora playlist, assuming that you're still on Spotify, given that there's a revolt going on right now, but what's the most surprising thing that people would find?
That I'm not on Spotify or Pandora.
Are you a vinyl guy?
No, actually, I go through YouTube.
Okay.
I like the videos. I'm a pentaholic, is what I am. A Pentatonics fan and other a cappella groups. So
great. Oh, well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, my son-in-law was a big a cappella guy in college, so I'm well acquainted with that. Okay, binges on TV binges, or you don't watch TV either?
I do. And during COVID, especially in the winter, as you know, it's a little tougher. You're spending more time inside, and that would be Downton Abbey, I would think. I didn't see it originally and binged on it and was worth every minute.
Oh, yeah, that's really fun. Have you tuned into his new thing centered around New York, kind of turn of the century New York? He's got another gig now.
Coming up. I'm going to wait till they come so I can binge.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. It's actually it's a funny behavioral change, because it didn't used to be a big thing to, you watch a show, you wait a week, you watch a show, you wait a week, all that kind of thing. And now it drives me absolutely crazy if I can't just sit there in about 3 or 4 days, go through the whole portfolio. And yeah, very, very strange. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I think I'll probably wait for the same thing. We have been on at the prompting of my daughter and son-in-law and my son and his girlfriend, on a Survivor binge, which we never watched in real time, but it's a very guilty pleasure that we have right now. So tell everybody a little bit about what you do and how you do it, and I'll put up the website here so that people can make sure that they click on it after the meeting is over. But tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm basically a reformed lawyer. So I practiced law for a while and then left and went into IT consulting for about 20 years, and then worked 17 years with the government, working most of that, 10 years of that on information management, and most of that on policy writing. And what I ended up doing was combining what I learned about how we approach legislation and writing with the way we write policies.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, legislation has been written for a long time. And if you look at the way legislation is written now, criminal legislation, for instance, it doesn't sound half as vicious as most of the policies that come out of people's offices. People are very worried that if they don't sound strict and stern, that no one's going to follow the rules. But if you look at the way criminal laws are worded, they're very straightforward. 80% of the penal codes in the US from the 50 states say things like setting fire to a house is arson. Arson is a crime. Offense is 2 years. There it is. Make a decision. It never says arson is forbidden. You mustn't do that. We don't tolerate that. None of that language.
You're bad. You're evil. You're,
No, none of that language. You're an adult. Here's the fact. Here's the way we do things. Make a decision.
So that might be a good hopping off point to the first question I wanted to ask you, which is, what's the biggest mistake that organizations typically make when they set up governance policies?
So the stick analogy you gave earlier is quite apropos. But the opposite of stick isn't just carrot, I think. So the mistake that people get into when they want to set them up is they approach it with a notion of, how do we keep people in line? How do we achieve our objectives and put fences around everything, because we can't trust people to do the right things? And so how do we control that? But the question is not even just how do we get people to want to do it, but how do we create the right culture in this organization? What kinds of policies do we need to create a culture that is going to push our agenda forward? And in the RIM world, you're talking about a culture of preservation, a culture of security, a culture of accountability, a lot of the things that we've talked about over the year. But the policies are about, how do I guide that culture? How do I target this organization to have that culture? And most people don't look at it that way.
That cultural observation is an interesting one, Lewis, because I used to have conversations with people that were trying to set up collaborative infrastructures within their organization. And they were trying to do so in a very, very hierarchical structure in their organization. And they'd be surprised then that somebody in a mid-level wasn't willing to comment honestly on their internal collaborative structures, because the culture was that the person at the top was going to put the hammer down if there was anything that anybody disagreed with. And so all that investment just in some organizations was for naught. And I've kind of felt the same way. You make a good point about governance. It kind of feels that way in a lot of governance circles right now.
Quite right. Especially when they say, I want to collaborate, but they want to protect their own silos. Okay. And IAM is just as guilty of it as all the other fields, I have to tell you. So, I was at one organization where they had this enormous policy for risk management about protecting and preserving the assets, the furniture, the vehicles, and all these kinds of things, security. And the IAM group wanted to do its own policy on protecting and preserving the information and guarding and safeguarding. And we're going to them and saying, all you need to do is get this first group to change the definition of asset to include information asset, and your work is done.
Yeah.
But the response was, why should those people make rules about our subject? That was the response. In other words, we can't break out of our silos.
Yeah, and that's so funny, because that is so much, in broader terms, the problem that we have in the information management arena is that we have, like, it's exactly what you said. We have systems to manage people. We have systems to manage property. We have systems to manage tools. We have, and yet when it comes to information, it's always been this kind of loosey-goosey kind of thing that is, people somehow think it's too complicated or too confining or too restrictive to do anything with. And that cultural norm is really something. And speaking of culture, you mentioned this before, and we talked about this before the meeting, but what are the kinds of negative messages that you're talking about? Organizations have good intentions. They come at this from the desire to preserve and protect the information assets of the organization, and yet they issue policies that are counter to that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, it's a part of reading the wording, and I wonder if I can show you instead of tell you, because if I tell you, you're going to hear a tone of voice, and I don't want to give away an attitude in a tone of voice. So I brought an example. There you go. If you look at those two policies, the one on the left is the very typical old style policy, which is, here's our command and here's the punishment. And the one on the right just says, this is the way we handle things. The thing about the one on the left is, it doesn't take much to read between the lines and see that this is a point of contention for this organization, that these people are used to not getting their week notice, and they're not happy about it, and they're feeling irrelevant and unappreciated. Gee, can IAM people relate to that? So that's coming out in the policy, and those kinds of messages shouldn't come out. Okay. Those organizations that are subject to open government and proactive release and all that, I mean, if we can look at that in 30 seconds and see that the HR group has a problem, the whole world will be able to do that.
Yep.
So it's easy to see outside the IM sphere. I give you another example that's in the IM sphere, which is very typical. The next one there. Yeah, I should be able to flip myself, right?
I think so. This is the first time that we've ever done this. So we're experimenting live, everybody. So go ahead.
So here you go. So here's a message again on the left, which says, we are about control. We are about control and doing bad things and punishment, as opposed to helping you do your job. And the one on the left is a hand being held out like this, setting up barriers. And the one on the right is offering to help. And it's those kinds of messages that don't move our agenda forward. There's also, one of the things that when we want to build a culture, one of the things we want to do is build a culture of trust. That is, go on the supposition that people really do want to do the right thing. And our job is to help them understand how to do their job and the right thing together. Okay, so our policies need to sound like we're going to trust. And that last threat, which I see in a lot of policies, always makes me smile, because it sounds like my great-grandmother. She used to say to me, don't make me mad. You don't know what I'm going to do when you get mad.
Or else.
That's right. So you better not break this policy because you don't want us to have to think of how we're going to punish you. That's what it sounds like to me. But it's certainly not moving the agenda of collaboration forward.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and again, it ties back to that cultural norm. And I've interacted with organizations in which you can almost predict who's going to have the kind of policies that are on the left and who's going to have the kind of policies that are on the right, just by talking to people for a few minutes. You can kind of get that sense.
Absolutely. And if I can point out a couple other things, actually, some we don't think of, but our IM policies are part of the employee experience of everybody else there. The same way finance policies might be part of our experience, our IM policies are part of their experience. And the problem with, even though we think we're siloed, bad policies from one group gets tars the whole organization, gets painted on everybody. And I've been told a number of stories where somebody says, we had this great candidate, and then they asked to see our policies, and they looked at it and they said, this does not jive with the type of organization you say you are.
And I would think that this is particularly the case in an environment in which there has been so much consumerization of technology, where, and I've mentioned this to other people in the past, where if you don't recognize kind of the reality of technology in your organization, given the availability of tools in the consumer sector, people are going to end run your policies every single time if they're too doctrinaire, if they're too forbidding, if they're, all those kinds of things. And you want people to, I would think, you have more experience with this than I do, I would think you want people to embrace what you're trying to achieve and help you achieve it.
Absolutely. You can lower that down now, that slide. Absolutely, we want people to be able to look at every single IM policy and say, that's a great policy. I think every organization should be doing that.
Yep.
Part of our job needs to be able to put what we think of as traditional IM values and IM culture in the context of the organization. So a very common example, for instance, is that IM often carries a compliance banner. Okay, right? You have to do it because we have to comply, and you have to do the comply. But compliance is not a value. Compliance is a strategy. There is a value behind it, and that value is integrity, corporate integrity. So that you say, as an organization, we did our job and we did it by the book. We followed the rules. That's corporate integrity. And I, as an executive, I followed the book, and I made sure my organization followed the book. That's what we're preserving with the banner of compliance, but very few people draw that connection.
Yeah.
If I can give you another example of that, because again, this is about culture. My colleague at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police has been trying to push the transparency thing to get people to release policies and release information publicly. And everybody says, yeah, what a great idea, and never did anything. But after a while trying to figure out what the value is behind transparency, the value is earning the trust of the public. And transparency is just a strategy that we do so that we can earn the trust of the public. Protecting privacy of information is just one of the things we do to earn the trust of the public. So when he stopped talking about the strategy of compliance and privacy protection, all that stuff, and started moving up the to how, as an organization, are we going to earn the trust of the public, he started getting all kinds of attention. People were paying attention to it because it was a common value. We've been trained on IM values, right? We talk about them all the time at conferences, but we're not taught to relate them to the corporate values. And that's it's hard work sometimes.
Yeah, and it's hard to get people serious about them if they're not connected to the core business that you're in.
Absolutely. We go around and we talk about preservation and we talk about disposition, and somebody says, but I sell skis. What has that got to do with anything?
Yeah.
I'm worried about customer quality and safety. What are you talking about? Preservation.
I'm awfully busy. I don't have time for all of your stuff.
Absolutely. But in fact, you are a unified organization, and you do have unified strategies and you may both be worried, in fact, about integrity, but integrity manifests itself in a different way for your lines of work. Mm-hmm. But we need to make that connection. That one of the ways that you show integrity is not just in products that don't fail, but in following the book when it comes to compliance. Right? We have to make that connection.
I've heard you talk before about the difference between policies and standards and procedures, and share with people kind of how you make those differentiations and what you think the difference is.
So, from my perspective, it's actually pretty straightforward. A procedure has a beginning and an end and steps in order, and you do it and then it's done. A standard is a set of technical specs. And when I say technical, I don't mean technological. I mean specific specifications. People, one of my old groups, they would say, we have this policy, we're telling everybody to keep their drives clean. And it always said, nobody's doing it. And I asked, what's the standard for a clean drive? Well, we didn't have one. So I think we should be setting, what does a clean drive look like so that we can strive for that? And we should be able, as subject matter experts, I think, to define some of these targets and set out standards and say, this is really where we want to be. And in some cases, I understand why we're not there now. But let's target 80% compliance by year end. Let's target 90% by the next year and not change the standard, as opposed to making it all about, well, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. The policy is the statement that it connects how you as an organization carry out your strategy and mandate and the decisions you make internally. That's what a policy is. So if I can use that privacy example, we want the public to trust us. So we're going to have a strategy that says we better take extra care of private information, because unless we do that, so from that strategy of taking care of private information, we might have a number of policies. We're going to proactively do inspections on apps before we release them. We're going to put in review processes. We're going to put in mechanisms. It's a bunch of things. This is how we're going to approach the culture of this organization. And those are the level that you want people to say, what a great idea. Yes, let us proactively prevent privacy breaches. Brilliant. That's the level you want them to buy in on it.
It's really interesting. Another example of that I've run into recently quite a bit is that there's, with a different hat that I've been wearing in the U.S. federal government, is there's an initiative right now relative to a new regulation that has to do with the scanning and digitization standards that are applied to permanent federal records. And not to get all arcane on everybody, but it's called FAGI 3, levels of compliance,
Mhm.
and levels of image quality. But the interesting thing for me when I started to think about this, it was, what it's all about is if you tell an organization you need to have good images and clear images and, all of those nice descriptive words, it doesn't really mean anything to anybody because all of that's in the eye of a beholder. And what you're really after is to create um, parameters around that digitization process so that, like any manufacturing process that you have, so that that when you push something out through a scanner, you're going to have a quality image. And
Agreed.
and again, that point you're making, I think, is a really good one. Is you know what is good, what is compliant, what is what is consistent, what is responsible. All that stuff doesn't really mean anything until you apply.
Exactly. And those are the standards I think IM people should be spending more time creating.
Yeah.
In the example you just gave, you take that standard of what constitutes a good and legal image, and you take your procedures and you walk them to a business area and you say, when it's a policy and it's a you must do this or you don't do this and you will be punished, we don't have that kind of flexibility. But if we're saying, no, this is a standard and this is a target. And it's one other thing I have to point out, when I ask IM people, what percent of compliance would you like in your organization for the IM policies? And 80%, 85%, 90%. How nice. Tell me, what percent compliance do you think you have with the speeding laws in your area? Like, yeah, okay. So the fact is that most people who break the speeding laws are not doing it because they don't believe there should be speeding laws. And there are all kinds of practical reasons why people have to go around or, and make judgments and all kinds of things that they do. And our job, the job of the road people there, is to come up with a speed on the road and a defensible rationale for why they've chosen that speed and that standard. And that's the IM job too, I think. It's to produce a standard with a defensible rationale for why that should be the standard to aim for, and then a plan to get there.
Yep. So let's flip this to the positive now so that I'm not, saying what organizations shouldn't do. How can organizations make their policies stick without being overbearing to people?
So the first thing they should do is check their corporate values. So let's start at the top. Look at the mandate, look at the corporate values, and see where they can draw lines between what they're asking and what's in the mandate, the value, maybe a major strategy. Okay, because those are the areas that we and the other business areas converge at the top. Okay, now sometimes our organization doesn't really have corporate values that help us. They have. If an organization has integrity as a corporate value, that's great. But sometimes they'll have something, like dedication and joy or something as a value. That really doesn't help us a lot. In that case, we need to set up values that we believe we are working towards. And it's not things like compliance and standardization and all these things, which are really just strategies. But values are things that people will leave a job for if it's not there. Accuracy. We believe in accuracy. We believe in being a trustworthy organization. And if people do not accept that, people will leave an organization for that. Nobody leaves an organization because you didn't standardize this thing or that thing, right? But they will leave if you're not meeting the values. So the idea is to identify some values that will be resonate with other people and draw the lines from your policies up to the values. So that's asking, can an IG professional write these technical specs? I think only an IG professional can write the technical specs. That is, if what you're describing is a target, what is a safe system? What is a good image? What is a good drive? What does a good life cycle look like? Let's describe it. Let's paint the picture and set out what those technical descriptions are. That's professional expertise. The other thing I think is to spend less time on the roles and responsibilities, because that's really a primary decision which has to get done once. You're in charge of this, you're in charge of this. Okay, we do that, great. And now let's move on to what role do you as a group play in promoting this strategy? What role, how can you, in whatever section you are, the IT, the security section, the IT section, the freedom of information section, how do we work together with you to make sure we're promoting trustworthiness of the organization? That's the discussion you want to be holding.
Really interesting. I assume this is what you're going to talk about at the MER conference?
The MER conference, actually, I have a session just before the MER where I'm going to explain to people this difference between the values and the strategies and the policies, etc. And then we're going to have a workshop at the MER conference where we're going to take some of the stuff that are traditional IM lifecycle things like classification and preservation, etc., and see if we can't trace back those habits, standards, values, and procedures that we are used to using, and can't reword them into language that will resonate with the rest of the organization.
And why the MER conference? Why do you think that event is important?
MER is great, I have to tell you, because so when I was a lawyer, what I learned was that policies were just extensions of contracts. Okay, so we treated them like that. And that when I got into the business world, I was, no, they're not really extensions of contracts. So contracts are adversarial documents. Policies are supposed to be collaborative. So records people and lawyers need to learn to work better together. They need to learn, we need to be able to take the policy and the culture vision and take it to the lawyer and ask the lawyer the right question, which is, what are the risks? What are the risks here? Where are the legal trapples? Where are the loopholes? Tell us those, and then go back to the business and make some assessment. And the MER conference is a forum where we're all in the same room and can have that discussion of how we work together.
This has really been fun. Let me give you my last question, which I usually like to ask people, which is my country western song question, which is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
When I was 25, I knew everything. It was amazing. And now that I'm 30 or older, now many years later, I realized that nobody knows everything. There's just so much variety, so much change, that I wish I had been more open to realizing that my view of the world was narrow. And to try and, we assume, same as when you go to another country, you kind of assume things are going to be the same unless you run into differences. I wish I hadn't made those kinds of assumptions. I'm going to go to this new office and that's the way their IM will work. I'm going to go to this office and that's the way they're going to be working together. Those things I wish I'd done different.
Yeah, I hear you, Lewis. I have the same sense sometimes. It's not so much the things, it's the assumptions I wish I had realized I was making that didn't necessarily prove out to be true, and that leads you down a path that you don't necessarily want to go down. And it's a reflection that I think is worthwhile for a lot of people to think about as they think about governance. So thank you all very much. I really look forward to seeing you at MER, and urge people to sign up for the pre-con that you're going to be doing. And it's a really terrific event. And I've heard you speak before. You do a terrific job. People will love it. So
thank you.
So thanks a lot. And everybody take care. Thank you for being with us today. And I apologize for a little bit of the confusion about the start time. So thanks.